Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be reading some articles out of History Magazine. And these articles were chosen by my channel members. They were chosen by Alessia, Alex, Luna, CMB, Marta, Robot Canary, Chris W, and Lucy. Thank you all so much for picking these articles tonight. It's a long list of names because we have a lot of articles to get through. But first, if you would like to choose articles out of History Magazine for future videos, you can go to the join button, which should be somewhere right around here probably. Or if you're on mobile and there is no join button, you can open the description box. And the very first link in there goes to my channel membership join page. It is only 99 cents a month. There's no tiers. There will never be price increases. And you get lots of goodies, including exclusive members' choice videos. You guys pick the topics and I read books to you. You get your name in every video. There's all kinds of perks. But one of them's History Magazine. So the articles that we have tonight I've titled Ancient Kings and Castles. And as you can see on the cover here, we'll be starting off with the Nubian pharaohs, particularly Taharqa, the most famous of the Nubian pharaohs. Then we will be talking about Cyrus the Great, founder of the Persian Empire. Then we will be talking about the last kings of Rome, that very tumultuous time. And then lastly, just because this article is really neat and it didn't really fit into any other theme, we're going to be talking about castles. I'm just shoehorning in this article. So it's going to be a long video, so let's get right into it. We've got a lot to cover tonight. Starting with the Nubian pharaohs. Put these over here, I guess. My goodness, I have so many magazines. Alright, the Nubian pharaohs. I'm going to start by reading and then look at all the little pictures. Say hello to the tow truck outside. Someone on my street owns a tow truck company, so they come and go whenever they get a call. So hopefully all went well during that tow. I can hear them driving back to their home. Hopefully whoever that was got home safe. And now they're gone and we can start. South of Egypt, the Nile meanders through a vast desert landscape, the ancient region of Nubia, which now belongs to Sudan. Since antiquity, Nubia's fortunes have been marked by the presence of 6 cataracts along the Nile. At these points, the rocky riverbed forces the Nile waters to swirl into mighty rapids, making uninterrupted navigation impossible. This is why, for long periods throughout history, Nubia remained isolated from its powerful northern neighbor, Egypt. But starting in the 8th century BCE, Nubian pharaohs from a Kushite kingdom, now in northern Sudan, ruled Egypt. For more than 100 years, they revived and adapted ancient Egyptian customs, influencing the development of Egypt for centuries to come. The first indigenous monarchy documented in Nubia was the independent monarchy of Kerma, also called Kush, in Upper Nubia. It flourished during the 2nd millennium BCE, with Kushite monarchs practicing religious rites in mud brick buildings such as the colossal Defufa presiding over the city of Kerma. Because of the difficulties accessing Nubia by river, economic, cultural, and even military interactions with neighboring Egypt took place via routes through the desert. During the Old Kingdom, Egyptian traders had been traveling to Nubia to sell their wares and acquire gold, ivory, incense, and enslaved people. In a letter written around 2200 BCE, Pharaoh Pepi II tells Harkuf, a governor of Upper Egypt who traveled through Nubia, "Come north to the residence at once. Hurry, and bring with you this pygmy slave whom you brought from the land of the horizon dwellers live, hale and healthy for the dances of the god, to gladden the heart, to delight the heart of King Neferkari who lives forever." Later, during the Middle Kingdom, the Egyptians established fortifications in Lower Nubia, bringing the Kushite territory between the first and second cataracts from Aswan to beyond Abu Simbel, under the control of the Egyptian pharaohs. Their purpose was to control trade in the region and secure Egypt's southern border. During the New Kingdom, the first pharaohs of the 18th dynasty annexed Nubian territory all the way to the Fourth Cataract. The pharaohs appointed viceroys who ruled over Nubian lands, which they called Kush, from about 1550 to 1069 BCE. These viceroys commissioned the construction of imposing fortresses and splendid temples, such as those at Abu Simbel and Soleb. During the era known as the Third Intermediate Period, Egypt's government was in the throes of political chaos and decline. Nubia was left fairly free of pharaonic intervention, and several new, independent Kushite kingdoms flourished. In one of these, near the Fourth Cataract, a dynasty of rulers emerged in the mid-8th century BCE, this time establishing the kingdom's capital at Napata and a necropolis at nearby El Kuru. The rulers of this Kushite kingdom would eventually govern those who had once controlled them, even becoming pharaohs of Egypt themselves. Taharqa the Conqueror. This new Kushite kingdom was founded by two kings, Alara and Kashta. Kashta's son Piye later pushed the empire's boundaries as far as Elephantine, or present-day Aswan, thereby bringing Lower Egypt under Kushite control. Piye also set his sights on Upper Egypt, and around 727 BCE launched a military expedition in which he took Hermopolis and sacked Memphis. But Piye returned to Napata without consolidating Kushite dominion over Egypt. That mission would be accomplished by his successors Shabaka, or Shabako, and Shebiktu, or Shabetaka. As representatives of a new Egyptian dynasty, the 25th, these Nubian kings moved their capital to Thebes and secured control of the country as far north as the Nile Delta. The most renowned pharaoh of the 25th dynasty was undoubtedly Taharqa, brother of Shebiktu. Many scholars believe Taharqa is the Kushite king Taharqa, mentioned in the Bible's book of Isaiah regarding the invasion that Assyrian king Sennacherib launched against Judah. Now Sennacherib received a report that Taharqa, the king of Kush, was marching out to fight against him. From Egyptian sources it appears that under the reign of Shebiktu, Taharqa had been charged with supporting the kingdom of Judah against the Assyrians. In the end, Jerusalem did not fall into Assyrian hands, a fact the Bible attributes to the Lord answering Hezekiah's prayers. The angel of the Lord went out and put to death the 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew. Taharqa the Builder. Taharqa insisted his claim to power was not only hereditary but also divine. On a stela from his temple of Amun at Kawa, he declares, "I received the diadem in Memphis after the falcon went up to heaven, and my father Amun had ordered for me that every land be placed under my feet." This alludes to the fact that the pharaoh had succeeded his predecessor after his death. The identity of the king associated with a falcon, in other words with the god Horus, who was often linked with another falcon god Hemen, isn't specified, but the phrase likely refers to Shipiktu, who, according to the same stela, loved Taharqa more than all his other brothers. During Taharqa's reign, which lasted almost 26 years, the pharaoh commissioned numerous monuments and religious buildings. In Thebes, he added new spaces to the great temple of Amun at Karnak, notably a structure called the Kiosk of Taharqa in the first courtyard. He had the sanctuary of Amun at Napata rebuilt and constructed a temple to Amun at Kawa in about 680 BCE. In the Kawa sanctuary, a commemorative inscription reads, "Mark you, my mind is set on rebuilding the temple compound of my father, Amun-Ra of Kawa, because it is built of brick only and covered with earth." Taharqa had his burial pyramid built in Nuri, on the opposite bank from the necropolis at El Kuru, where his ancestors lay. What prompted the location change is unclear, but it's likely that the site of the necropolis was linked to Jabal Barkal, the pure mountain of Napata, a natural sandstone butte that dominated the Nubian capital. The pinnacle of this mound, reaching a height of almost 250 feet, was said to resemble the rearing cobra, or uraeus, a symbol of royalty. When seen from Jabal Barkal on Egyptian New Year's Day, the sun seemed to rise directly over the pinnacle of the pyramid of Taharqa. Since the holiday coincided with the annual regenerative flooding of the Nile, this linked Taharqa with not only the sun god Ra, but also Osiris, the god of the afterlife and fertility. Legacy of Taharqa. The death of Taharqa in 664 BCE marked the decline of Nubian rule over Egypt. Taharqa had already lost control of Lower Egypt to Ashurbanipal in 667 BCE. Taharqa's successor, his nephew Tanutamani, briefly regained control of Upper Egypt before being defeated once again in 663 BCE by Ashurbanipal. Tanutamani was forced to return to Nubia, where he remained until his death. After the fall of the 25th dynasty, the new kingdom of Meroe was established in Nubia, tending the flame of Egyptian culture until the 4th century CE. There, the temple of Naga, where Nubian divinities such as the lion god Apedemak are represented alongside the Egyptian god Horus, exemplifies the syncretic culture the Kushites fostered and the ways in which Nubia and Egypt are forever linked. So here's a little diagram of Jebel Barkal and the surrounding city, I suppose. You can see number 1, here's the great temple of Amun, and the Temple of Amun complex here, the enthronement pavilion, and the temples of Hathor and Mut right there. And you can see a photograph of that site, what it looks like today. You can see the shadow of the pinnacle right there. It's a neat photo. Here's an actual photo of Jebel Barkal, and you can see, it's talking about the symbol, what was it called? The uraeus. On like the pharaoh's hat, they would have that like cobra at the front. It looks like that. Can you see? There's the hat and there's the cobra. I see it. I hope you can see it. The Nubians saw it. And then down here we have some remains of the temple that's there as well. You can see the mountain back there. Let's see, who's this? Guess it's Taharqa, but his face is lost to time. That's unfortunate. I hope they'll was accidental, not on purpose. And there's Ashurbanipal. I've already read an article about him. So here's a neat depiction. I assume that's Taharqa. Yes, Taharqa. The procession, and you can see Jebel Barkal in the background there. Here is a Nubian pyramid. I guess this is Taharqa's, it says. That's really neat. And this is Taharqa giving an offering to Hemin, the falcon god. It's really neat. And they believe that this is Shebiktu, or a bust of him. This is necropolis of El Kuru. Pictured here's the largest pyramid. This is a picture of the Shabaka stone, a stela from the Nubian times. It says it's now at the British Museum. A little statuette of Bastet, which says that's in the Louvre currently. And here's a cool map here. Of course, we have Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt, because the Nile flows this way. So this is the top, that's the bottom. So let's see. And then down here, of course, would be Nubia. There's Upper Nubia, you can see. And let's see, what does the orange mean? I can't really tell. I assume that's Nubian control. The Kushite heartland. You can see there's El Kuru and Jebel Barkal. Meroe is over here. This is a really neat site. This is a bucket list place for me, but I suppose I should add Jebel Barkal to that. And of course there's Abu Simbel, Aswan, it mentioned Elephantine, and so on and so forth. And there's Khartoum, the current capital of Sudan. This is at Kerma, ancient capital of Nubian kingdom of Kush. And some little neat statues here. It says they're of Nubian kings. They were found in pieces near Kerma, and now they're restored at the Kerma Museum in Sudan. Then, of course, we can see a bunch of Nubian pyramids here. Did not really stand up to the wear and tear of time. But they would perfect that down in Meroe. That looks like Taharqa, does it say? Yep, statue of Taharqa. That's at the Sudan National Museum in Khartoum. This is a fascinating story. And if I remember, I'm going to link a video up there that I filmed way back at the start of my channel, reading a book about Nubia and Meroe, and that really sparked my interest in that history. And now I'm like desperate to go see the pyramids at Meroe someday. Let's move on. I tried to put these in chronological order. I believe I succeeded. Pretty sure. But we're going to talk about Cyrus the Great. I know us history nerds have a lot of preconceptions about Cyrus the Great, and this challenges some of that, which is really interesting. Let's get into it. Let me fix my headphones first. You might hear them. There we go. The Achaemenid kings of Persia ruled the largest empire in the world between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE, but much of what we know about them today comes from Greek rather than Persian sources. The various Greek authors who wrote about the Persians tended to depict them as decadent and weak-willed, ruled by a series of self-styled great kings. Persian culture was often contrasted with the austerity of Athens and Sparta. The stories of Persian kings that have filtered down through Greek works of philosophy, history, and plays mix first-hand observations with a large dose of fiction and fantasy. It should be remembered that the Greeks saw the might of Persia as a huge threat. For half a century, they were engaged in the Greco-Persian Wars, fighting to keep that threat at bay. This enmity shaped how they framed their accounts. The Achaemenid kings were usually portrayed as exhibiting the most ignoble vices, being arrogant and cruel, lazy and weak-willed, lovers of luxury, and easily seduced by spies in the harem. The Greeks painted Persian kings as stereotypical barbarian rulers of a foreign world dominated by violence and cruelty. There is, however, one exception, Cyrus II, known as Cyrus the Great. In general, the Greek sources present a very different story of his reign, which saw the creation of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, a vast dominion stretching from Asia Minor to the Indus River Valley, the largest empire known at that time. Through a series of brilliant military campaigns, Cyrus conquered all the great states of the Near East except Egypt in just over 10 years. He took Media in northwestern Iran, the Lydian kingdom ruled by Croesus in modern-day Turkey, the Greek cities of Asia Minor, and the Babylonian Empire in Mesopotamia. Under Cyrus, the Persian Empire became the hegemonic power in the East. Despite beginning his reign as a vassal king subject to the Median Empire, which he would later conquer, Cyrus was fierce and effective in battle. But he has also gone down in history as a humane leader and liberator who respected the customs, laws, and religions of the peoples whose lands he conquered. This aspect of his kingship was lauded in the ancient world and has defined his portrayal through the centuries. According to Herodotus, Cyrus, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, usually appears in Greek sources as an exemplary ruler and clement king, an image backed by Babylonian and Hebrew sources. In the writings of Greek historian Herodotus, around a century after Cyrus's death, Cyrus is depicted as benevolent, brave, and on good terms with his soldiers. And it is Herodotus who provides one of the most complete accounts of Cyrus's origins, albeit including some elements that are clearly legendary. I might mispronounce this name. I might mispronounce a couple things, especially in the next article. So feel free to correct if I do mispronounce it very wrong. He writes that Astyages, king of Media and grandfather of Cyrus, had a dream in which Cyrus seized the throne. Before the rise of the Achaemenid Empire, Persia was subject to Median control for many years as a vassal state. To avoid a future challenge from his grandson Cyrus, who was still a baby at the time, King Astyages ordered his general to kill the infant. But instead, the general took pity on the baby and secretly gave him to a family of humble shepherds to raise. As the young Cyrus went through childhood, he stood out for his daring nature and leadership. This eventually led Astyages to discover his true identity. A conflict later ensued between the Persians under Cyrus and the Medes under Astyages, and the Persians won. Herodotus describes how Cyrus, having decided to rebel against the Medes, needed to gain his soldiers' commitment. So he gave them a task. He ordered the men to spend all day clearing a field of thorny plants. The next day they returned to find a great feast awaiting them. When they had eaten their fill, Cyrus asked which they preferred, to remain enslaved and exploited by the Medes, which was akin to clearing a field of thistles, or to throw off the Median yoke, attain freedom, and enjoy abundance by creating their own empire. This episode gives an insight into how skilled Cyrus was at motivating his soldiers for war, a factor that would be key in his future conquests. Herodotus writes that the Persians felt such affection for Cyrus that they thought of him as a father figure. Plutarch, another Greek historian, corroborates the claim. The Persians love those with aquiline noses because Cyrus, the most beloved of their kings, had a nose of that shape. Let me see the picture. Does he have an aquiline nose? Oh yeah, look at that. Can you see? Very aquiline. Herodotus does, however, mention Cyrus displaying some worrying behavior at the end of his life. One example is the strange punishment the king inflicted on the Gindes River, possibly the modern-day Tiela River. After one of his horses drowned in it, Cyrus allegedly sent his army to work for a whole summer, dividing this tributary of the Tigris into 360 channels as revenge for the horse's death. Given that the Persians believed watercourses were sacred, this was a sacrilegious act as well as an irrational one. Herodotus also relates it to the dramatic circumstances of Cyrus's death. He records that the king was killed while fighting against the Massagetæ, a nomadic people of Central Asia ruled by Queen Tomyris, I'm guessing. Cyrus's body was then defiled by Tomyris as revenge for her son's death. According to Herodotus, this last military campaign was driven by Cyrus's arrogance and led him to be punished by the gods. Herodotus uses this narrative to reflect on the degeneration of Persian power. He claims that as Cyrus's conquests stacked up, he and his people began to abandon the austerity and self-discipline of their origins in favor of opulence and ease. According to Herodotus and later Greek authors, it was this shift in behavior that triggered the decadence of the Persian Empire and the corruption of its great kings. A romanticized vision. The Cyropedia is an idealized biography of Cyrus as the philosopher king, compiled by Xenophon, who was an Athenian historian and philosopher who lived between the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. Xenophon, who supported the idea of a monarchy, used Cyrus as a figure to project his vision of the ideal monarch. The Cyrus portrayed in the Cyropedia should be read as a largely fictional character, created by Xenophon to reflect his own political views. To write the Cyropedia, Xenophon drew on the works of earlier Greek authors, such as Herodotus, but he also had first-hand knowledge of the Persian world. From 401 to 399 BCE, Xenophon participated in the expedition of the 10,000 as a member of an army of Greek mercenaries recruited by another Cyrus of the Achaemenid dynasty, Cyrus the Younger. This Cyrus was rebelling against the authority of his brother, King Artaxerxes II. During the campaign, Xenophon must have heard accounts of the life of Cyrus II, embellished by Persian tradition. Xenophon depicts Cyrus the Great as a studious king, just, generous, affectionate with his men, brave and eager for glory. Cyrus the Great, as portrayed by Xenophon, matched the cliché of the great king that was typical in popular Persian stories of the day. He was handsome and strong, and his kingly qualities had been evident from childhood. According to Xenophon's account, Cyrus the Great piously fulfilled all his religious duties, thereby winning favor from the gods. Put simply, the great king excelled in governing, because so very different was he from all other kings. This positive view is supported by the historian Diodorus of Sicily, who writes that Cyrus was preeminent among the men of his time in bravery and sagacity and other virtues. For his father, Cambyses I, had reared him after the manner of kings and had made him zealous to emulate the highest achievements. Many of Cyrus's conquests, such as Media and Lydia, are often ascribed to his military expertise. The fall of Babylon, however, is also accredited to King Nabonidus' failure to honor the city's chief god Marduk, causing dissension and the opportunity for invasion. Cyrus's religious tolerance, abolishment of labor service, and the freeing of Jews garnered him praise. Xenophon claims that the great king exhorted his subjects, saying, "Next to the gods, however, show respect also to all the race of men, as they continue in perpetual succession." This was an indication of Cyrus's humanitarian qualities that so exalted him in the eyes of the Greek historian. The Cyropedia contains a variant account of Cyrus's death. He did not die in combat, as Herodotus claimed, but in the palace surrounded by his sons. Xenophon adds that death came while Cyrus was immersed in a conversation about immortality and urging his listeners to lead dignified and pious lives. This scene is reminiscent of the death of Socrates, Xenophon's mentor, who died by suicide surrounded by his friends and followers after his fellow Athenians condemned him to death. Plato and Ctesias, I think that's how you say that. Oh goodness, I believe. The philosopher Plato, another disciple of Socrates, also makes reference to Cyrus, again portraying him as an exemplar of justice and wisdom. Sorry for the airplane outside. I hope that's not picking up on the microphone. I hope. According to Plato, the Persians under Cyrus maintained the correct balance between servitude and freedom. This enabled them to become masters of an empire. But after Cyrus's reign, this balance was upset as his successors succumbed to the love of luxury, decadence, and the pleasure of the harem, which eventually led to the empire's collapse. And I'm going to take a break, wait for this airplane to fly by. Alright, it's gone, I think. I hope. Not all Greek authors are so favorable to the figure of Cyrus, however. Ctesias, for example, was a Greek physician and historian who in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE served at the court of the Persian king Artaxerxes II. There, Ctesias says, he was able to consult the royal annals of the Achaemenids directly. The information Ctesias conveys about Cyrus is characterized by hostility and suspicion and contrasts with earlier accounts. According to, maybe it's Ctesias. Let's say that. Ctesias. Cyrus's origins were not as noble as Herodotus and Xenophon indicate. He claims that the future monarch was born the son of a bandit called Atridates and a goat herder called Argoste. Cyrus's humble nomadic background framed him as a barbarian at odds with the civilized life of Greek society. His rise to kingship was not too praiseworthy either. According to this account, after rebelling against the Median king Astyages, Cyrus allegedly killed the defeated king's son-in-law Spitamus and married the king's daughter Amytis. In other words, Cyrus was a usurper with no birthright to the Median throne. Ctesias also has a different story of Cyrus's death, claiming that the king died of a thigh wound sustained during a confrontation with the Derbices, a people from eastern Iran. A less than pious king. Finally, Isocrates, Athenian orator and politician, also mentions Cyrus but does not consider all his actions to be pious or just. Regarding the war between the Medes and Persians, Isocrates writes that after Astyages, king of the Medes and grandfather of Cyrus, had been defeated, Cyrus had unjustly ordered his death. This account should be seen in context. Isocrates was a defender of the Greeks' union against the Persian threat. His views on Persia may have influenced his negative depiction. Despite a few detractors, Cyrus II was the Achaemenid king treated best by Greek tradition. He was generally presented as an ideal monarch, a model of the wise, pious, and just sovereign. According to Greek tradition, the decline of the Persian Empire began with his son, Cambyses II. From then on, according to the Greek sources at least, Persia would be ruled by cruel, impious despots. Xerxes I, the Achaemenid king who dared to attack continental Greece in 480 BCE during the Greco-Persian Wars, was foremost among these. The Greeks' biased portrayal of the Persian monarchy has influenced ideas about the Achaemenids up to the present day. Let's see, there's a map here of the Persian Empire. We won't look at it for too long, but you can see it stretching all the way to the ends of Turkey, or Anatolia, I should say, up through the Caucasus, down here through the Levant, following Mesopotamia, following the rivers down here, the way around the Caspian, up into what's now Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, almost all the way out into what's now Pakistan. Pretty huge empire. I wouldn't see anything like it until the I want to say the Genghis Khans, the Mongols. The Mongols, or the Romans. No, the Romans had a bigger empire than this, for sure. Than the Mongols. What's down here? Persian gold python. It's pretty neat. Drinking vessel. And let's see. This lion likely represented 1 talent, which was a measurement of weight. Right, this is the believed to be tomb of Cyrus the Great in Iran, of course. Does it say where this is exactly? At Pasargadae, which is an archaeological site now. Let's see. What is this? Queen Tamiris orders Cyrus's severed head to be immersed in a wineskin filled with blood. Blah, blah, blah. And here's a really amazing painting of the fall of Babylon. As the Persians invade, you can see the Tower of Babel there. And lightning. Pew, pew. All the soldiers fighting down here. This is the ruins of Sardis, which was the capital of Lydia, it says. A really beautiful Greek vase here showing King Croesus, I suppose. Yeah, Croesus of Lydia sits atop a pyre, being lit by the servant as Cyrus sentences him to death. There's Herodotus down there. This is the reconstructed walls of Babylon, reconstructed very recently in the late 20th century for tourists to come get the Babylon experience. Let's see, this must be, Cyrus granting freedom to the Jews of Babylon, saying, y'all can go home to Israel, Judah. Go on home. The Cyrus cylinder, this is in the British Museum, it says. And this was found at Babylon in 1879. Surely talking about Cyrus, right? This is the ruins of Ecbatana, which was the Median capital, today in Iran. And here's a really cool painting of baby Cyrus being condemned to death. This is a gold head from the Oxus treasure. And a fish. A fish created from hammered gold sheets by the Persians. Sure. If you really like your fish. This is really pretty. Is it an armband? A Persian armlet. Close enough. Same difference. Also part of the Oxus treasure. And there's, of course, Cyrus the Great. On to our last series of kings here, very notorious in Italian history. Etruscans on the throne, it says. We set this aside and get into it. Before it was an empire, before it was a republic, Rome was a kingdom. Its legendary founder Romulus was the first rex, or king. According to tradition, his reign began in 753 BCE. Rome is believed to have had 7 kings in all, and the monarchy lasted for more than 240 years. Unlike the other rexes, the last 3 kings, Tarquin the Elder, Servius Tullius, and Tarquin the Proud, all shared Etruscan ancestry, tracing it back to a civilization that flourished in central Italy between the 8th and 3rd centuries BCE. Of all Rome's royalty, they perhaps made the biggest impact on the Eternal City. Their notable deeds, questionable reputations, and bloody deaths would end Rome's time as a monarchy and drive it into the dawn of the Republic. Divine connections. Accurate records of these times, however, are scant. Some sources are conflicting, and many of the most popular ones, such as the 1st century BCE historian Titus Livius, or Livy, were compiled centuries after the events they describe, making it difficult to take their accounts at face value. Many of these accounts also blend the fantastic with the everyday. Rome's founders Romulus and Remus had origin stories steeped in myth. Sons of the god Mars, the twin infants were abandoned by a local king who feared his sons would overthrow him. A river god rescued the pair, who were then raised by a she-wolf, a motif that became a symbol for the city of Rome. Accounts surrounding the last 3 kings of Rome are no less fantastical. The origin story of the first, Tarquin the Elder, is rich with omens and portents. As it was told by Livy, the story begins around 625 BCE, when a wealthy immigrant named Lucius Tarquinius Priscus arrived in Rome from Etruria. He belonged to the Tarquini clan from the city of Tarquinia, about 45 miles to the northwest. As his chariot was about to cross the Tiber River, an eagle swooped down from above, snatched his cap, circled overhead, and then placed it gently back on his head. Lucomo's wife, Tanaquil, was a soothsayer and interpreter, and interpreted the encounter as auspicious. The eagle was a symbol of royalty, she pointed out, and so surely the interaction indicated that her husband would achieve the highest honors in Rome. Lucius Priscus Tarquinius quickly rose to prominence, securing the position of advisor to Roman King Ancus Marcius. After Marcius's death in 616 BCE, the throne did not pass to his children. Tarquin had leveraged his influence with Marcius and was appointed to the position himself. He was the first king of what became known as the Etruscan monarchy, a period that lasted just over a century. As king, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, better known as Tarquin the Elder, is said to have increased the number of persons of senatorial and equestrian rank. He also is thought to have instituted the Roman games and to have begun the construction of a wall around the city. Tarquin is also credited with ordering the foundations of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, also known as the Temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, the most important temple in ancient Rome, to be laid on the Capitoline Hill. He chose the location for the Circus Maximus, a stadium more than 650 yards long, where sports competitions and chariot and horse races were held. He initiated the construction of the Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's oldest drainage systems that ran a mile long from the Esquiline Hill via the Forum and emptied into the Tiber. Initially, it acted as an open-air channel for low-lying parts of the city, in which the rainy months turned to swamp and harbored malaria. Later, it would be enclosed and transformed into a network of sewers. Son of a servant. Tarquin the Elder's reign came to an end when he was assassinated in 578 BCE. His murderers were the sons of Marsyas, who sought revenge against Tarquin. They allegedly hired 2 shepherds to fake a dispute before the king. When Tarquin turned toward one of them to listen to his version, the other struck him with an axe and fled. Marsyas' sons had hoped to seize the throne for themselves, but that was not to be, thanks to some quick thinking on the part of Tanquil, his wife. After Tarquin was wounded, the queen quickly had him taken into the palace while he was still breathing. From a palace window, she later addressed an assembled crowd to say that before Tarquin had died, he named someone else to serve as king. It was Servius Tullius, who Livy states was in the highest esteem not only with the king, but also with the Senate and people. As his first act, Tullius had the assassins arrested, dashing their hopes for power. Servius Tullius was also Etruscan by blood, but not related to Tarquin. He had been adopted as his protege and grew up in the palace. Upon reaching manhood, he became a trusted royal advisor. He even married the king's daughter, despite having a humble background. The name Servius suggests that Tullius was the son of a slave, which is service in Latin. For a king of Rome to have such base origins would be unusual, to say the least. Historian T.J. Cornell wrote that Tullius's ancestry would be shameful and embarrassing to Romans. Perhaps to add legitimacy to his reign, stories emerged that aligned Tullius with the divine. Like Romulus, Tullius was the son of a god in some versions. In one, his mother, Ocrisia, had been a handmaid to Tanquil. While placing offerings at the hearth, Ocrisia was impregnated by a flame from the fire. Tanquil claimed that the child must be the son of Vulcan, the Roman god of fire. Livy reports that a crown of flames appeared over the child's head to convey divine blessings. Convinced that the child was destined for greatness, the queen encouraged Tarquin to take in the boy. Another version of Tullius's heritage is more prosaic and plausible, although it was recorded centuries later by the scholar Emperor Claudius. Studying the Etruscan sources, Claudius suggests that Tullius was actually an Etruscan mercenary named Mastarna, who brought his soldiers to Rome. He named the place where he settled the Caelian Hill, in homage to his deceased master, the chieftain Caelius Vibena. Royal deeds. Sorry for my squeaky chair. As Rex, Tullius is credited with many reforms. He's thought to have decreed the first census in order to register all Roman citizens and their wealth. Some claim that he also carried out major social engineering policies, abandoning the 3 traditional tribes to establish 21 new tribes, based not on kinship but on place of residence. Others, however, see such a radical overhaul as anachronistic and trace only the 4 urban tribes to the time of Tullius, with the other 17 rural tribes being added later. Another achievement that Livy attributed to Tullius, but other sources say happened later, is the restructuring of the army into centuriae, or 100-man units, according to a precise hierarchical scale based on income. In reality, as the Roman economy was not monetized at that point, it would have been difficult to calculate financial worth as precisely as Livy suggested. The army at that time still consisted of a single legio, or legion, a term that meant selection, and would have numbered between 4,000 and 5,000 men, a considerable size by the standards of the local cities during that period. Tullius is also believed to have built the Sevine Wall, an early fortification around the city of Rome. The original wall was replaced in the 4th century BCE. The new wall was built with better quality stone extracted from the Grotta Oscura quarry near Veii. The new vestiges of the wall attributed to Tullius that remain suggest that it measured less than 7 miles long and followed the same path as the one that replaced it later. Rome's last wrecks. After reigning for 4.5 decades, Tullius was beloved by the people, but that did not keep treachery at bay. He fell into an assassination plot hatched in part by his own daughter, Tullia Minor. Married to Lucius Tarquinius, a son or grandson of Tarquin the Elder, she encouraged her husband to kill her father and take power for himself. Livy records the assassination as a carefully choreographed affair. Tarquinius went to the Senate house, sat on the king's throne, and then delivered a tirade against his father-in-law, calling him a slave born of a slave. When Tullius arrived to answer these charges, Tarquinius grabbed him and dragged him out into the street, where the assassins killed him. After he was dead, Tullia allegedly drove her chariot over her father's body, leaving a trail of blood through the streets. The last king of Rome would be remembered by the name Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud. Once on the throne, one of his first acts was to put several senators to death for being loyal to Tullius. He did not replace them, thereby reducing the Senate's size and influence. Tarquin appointed himself judge and jury in capital cases in order to cement fear of his judgments among Roman citizens. Livy reports, conscious that the precedent of obtaining the crown by evil means might be adopted from him against himself, he surrounded his person with armed men, for he had no claim to the kingdom except force, inasmuch as he reigned without either the order of the people or the sanction of the Senate. Now, this next section has some pretty graphic essay and self-exiting, so if that is not what you're here for, feel free to just fast forward like 5 minutes or so to the next article, because it's kind of a lot. So, with that being said, Tarquin never tried to win the hearts of the Roman people and ruled through fear and intimidation. His approach to diplomacy was much the same, as he bullied and tricked rival kingdoms. In 509 BCE, the Roman army was laying siege to the city of Ardea. Soldiers and commanders camped outside the city walls, and the events that unfolded there would lead to the end of Tarquin's reign and the downfall of the Roman kingdom. In the camp, Sextus, son of Tarquin the Proud, and his cousin Collatinus were arguing over who had the most virtuous wife. To settle the dispute, the two men decided to travel undercover to Rome and spy on their respective wives. While Sextus's wife was enjoying a banquet with friends, Collatinus's wife, Lucretia, was quietly weaving, an activity proper for a chaste Roman woman. Driven by spite, Sextus vowed to sully Lucretia's virtue. A few days later, he traveled to her home, where she welcomed him as a guest. Sextus drew his sword and demanded that Lucretia have sex with him. Lucretia resisted, but Sextus threatened to slit her throat and then murder a male slave, lay him naked on the bed next to her, and announce that he had killed the couple after catching them in bed together. Lucretia understood that if she were dead, she could not bear witness to the crime against her, and her honor would be gone forever. She gave in, and Sextus raped her. According to Livy, a few days later she could bear it no longer, and told her father, her husband, and his friend Lucius Junius Brutus what had happened. Lucretia urged them to exact revenge. Yet my body only has been violated, my heart is guiltless, as death shall be my witness. But pledge your right hands and your words that the adulterer shall not go unpunished. On saying this, she stabbed herself in the chest and collapsed lifeless before them. Brutus was appalled by her account and death. According to Livy, he made a solemn promise. By this blood, most chaste until a prince wronged it, I swear, and I take you gods to witness, that I shall pursue Lucius Tarquinius Superbus and his wicked wife and all his children with sword, with fire, aye, with whatever violence I may, and that I will suffer neither them nor any other to be wrecks in Rome. Then he took the body of Lucretia to the market square in Calatia and told the people what had happened, which caused a riot that soon spread to Rome. Tarquin the Proud received the news in Ardea, where the siege was still going on. He hurried back to the city with his sons, but he found the gates locked and an order that he was banished in perpetuity. Although on several occasions he tried to regain the throne with the help of Etruscan allies and their supporters within the city, Tarquin the Proud never entered Rome again. According to Livy, the population, led by Brutus and Collatinus, who became the first consuls of the new regime, swore that they would never allow themselves to be governed by a king again. This beginning marked the start of a long period of Roman history, almost 5 centuries, known as the Roman Republic. When Augustus Caesar, the first emperor of Rome, established what would be a monarchical government, he was very careful to avoid calling himself Rex, a term that had become utterly tarnished by the actions of Tarquin the Proud, the last Rex of Rome. Yeah, there's a painting here of that last scene. You can see the Romulus and Remus statue up there being nursed by the she-wolf. So here is Lucretia's body. Down here is her father, being, of course, very devastated. And up here is Brutus proclaiming that no more kings, basically. We're going to get them out. And this guy's like, yeah, he's got his knife ready. And they're ready to kick out the king. And there's Lucretia being violated there in that painting. The king and the Sibyl. What's this? Tarquinius Superbus purchases 3 remaining Sibylline books from the Cumaean Sibyl. There's a whole story there we don't have time for, unfortunately. There is Lucius Junius Brutus right there. That's in the Capitoline Museum. The Servian Wall. Right there. Over his dead body it says Tullius steers. Oh, that's Tullius being driven over by his daughter. How horrible. And there's a bas relief of Tullius there. Some ruins here in Tarquinia. An Etruscan city, like it said. The Temple of Jupiter there on top of the Capitoline Hill in Rome. There's Tarquin the Elder being assassinated by axes. That's another horrible way to go. A little map of Italy at this time. There's the Etruscans up here. And, of course, we have Rome just right there. And this is that scene of the eagle coming down and snatching his hat. Everyone's like, whoa. That would be unusual to see. And this is some Etruscan Latin on this stone here. And then we have the part lion, goat, and snake chimera of Arezzo, which is an Etruscan like symbol. And then we have the three kings here, the last three kings. Tarquinius, I guess Primus, Servius, Tullius, and Tarquin Superbus. That's right. All right, let's move them out of the way and bring in our final article for the night. The Age of Castles, Fortresses of Feudal Europe. Yeah, like, I guess this does discuss some kings, and it talks about William the Conqueror, and gosh, I'm blanking, but we'll talk about them. So technically it still fits in the category of kings, but I don't know. This was a neat article, and I don't really have any other articles that fit this theme. So I was like, next time I talk about kings, I'll talk about the castles. So here we are. Let's get into it. The human instinct to seek protection behind walls or trenches or on top of natural elevations goes back millennia. But it was during the Middle Ages, and in response to the evolution of weaponry and warfare, that this drive led to the building of fortified castles. In this golden era of their construction, castles reached a degree of perfection and complexity unparalleled in history. The first medieval fortifications are very different from the imposing castles that appeared later. In the 9th and 10th centuries, the castles being constructed across Christian Europe were generally wooden structures built on top of artificial mounds that, after the Norman conquests, were called mottes. Typically, the motte would be surrounded by a defensive moat. The earth excavated to form the moat was then used to create defensive embankments that were topped with a wooden palisade. A wooden drawbridge provided access across the moat. By the 11th and 12th centuries, these mottes were proliferating across France and Anglo-Saxon and Norman England. As the Reconquista military campaign that European Christian kingdoms waged against the Muslim kingdoms who had been occupying much of the Iberian Peninsula since the early 8th century advanced, similar mottes were erected on the plains of Castile between the 10th and 11th centuries. One was the Mota de Muño in Burgos, Spain, which became the center of a busy community in the 10th and 11th centuries. It was common for towns to develop around these castles, as inhabitants benefited from the protection offered by the moats, raised earthworks, and wooden palisades. The wooden forts that topped these mottes were soon replaced by large, usually square stone towers. This central tower of a medieval castle was called a keep in English, a donjon in French, a Bergfried in German, and a Macchio in Italian. But its Spanish name, Torre del Homenaje, the Tower of Homage, speaks to one of its functions. From the middle of the 10th century, after the fall of the Carolingian Empire, imperial power in Western and Central Europe was being replaced by a large number of feudal lords who were practically sovereign in their territories. The towers of homage provided places where vassals could come to pay obedience to their lords. The stone castles that we recognize today as emblematically medieval appeared from the 11th and 12th centuries onward, having developed out of the comparatively simple earlier fortifications. The main impetus for this evolution from simple wooden keeps to formidable stone castles was the changing nature of warfare. Other than a few pitched battles, medieval warfare tended to focus most of its operations on the attempt to control the fortresses of a given territory. As the techniques and technology of those mounting sieges became more sophisticated, castle builders were driven to new heights of ingenuity. Castle design began to incorporate a series of concentric defensive walls. At the center of these, the old keep would be enlarged to become a last defensive stronghold. These imposing-looking fortresses proved remarkably effective in resisting assaults and invasions. Building a castle. The first task of the castle builder was to choose a suitable site. The castle's position in the landscape with respect to other fortified enclaves was key. It was essential to have a clear view of other fortifications in order to receive strategic messages, fiery beacons by night or smoke signals by day, which could warn of imminent danger, such as the incursion of an enemy army. The locale chosen had to command the surrounding area, especially strategic elements such as roads, bridges, and fords, while also offering access to agricultural and other resources. Other factors to consider were the availability of building materials and a water supply for filling wells, pools, and cisterns. The castle's defenders needed to stockpile enough food and water to allow them to hold out in the case of a prolonged siege. The next task was to secure the outer perimeter. This meant building defenses around the access points, as well as strategic locations, such as bridges and water sources. If large enough, a moat made it difficult for the enemy to get close enough to the walls to do damage with projectiles or battering rams. In places with dry climates and rocky terrain, the moats were usually dry, narrow, and deep. In temperate climes and in flat areas with clay-like soil, wide, shallow moats were dug and flooded with water. In the Iberian Peninsula, the Calatrava La Vieja Castle, which was fought over by Moorish and Christian forces throughout the 12th century, was built to turn the Guadiana River into a natural moat on its north side. A ditch dug around the rest of the castle was filled with water from the river. Beyond the moat stood the outer walls of the castle complex. Sometimes several walls were erected around the main enclosure, usually arranged concentrically. This meant that even if the enemy managed to break through the first line of defense, they could at least be ambushed before they reached the second. The walls were built high, making it difficult to fire arrows and other projectiles into the castle from outside. The height also served to deter climbers who might try to slip in by stealth at night using ladders and take the castles by surprise. While challenging, this type of sneak attack was apparently not uncommon. According to the Andalusian chronicler and historian Ibn Sahib al-Salat, writing sometime before the end of the 12th century, on rainy and very dark nights, Gerald the Fearless, a Portuguese Christian adventurer, prepared his very long wooden ladders and scaled castle walls and tower in person. Gerald was said to have climbed into numerous Almohad castles in present-day Western Spain and Portugal by using this method. Can you imagine? You're the Moorish guard at night and you see the ladder come up and you're like, it's Gerald. Gerald, get out of here. Jeez. Not again. Stupid Gerald. I just have this visual of Gerald being like, tonight's the night. Like, get my ladder. This mode of attack was such a concern that the law code Las Siete Partidas, written in the mid-13th century by King Alfonso X of Castile, warned that castle walls must be built tall enough so that anyone attempting to enter via a ladder would be deterred. No more Gerald. None can enter, not even Gerald. Although the keep had pride of place as a castle's main fortified tower, smaller towers were attached to the fortress walls and also rose above them. Square, circular, or pentagonal in shape, the smaller towers protected the base of the walls and acted as buttresses, strengthening the fortification. Any opening in the castle wall was a weak point, so any arrow slits or windows that did exist were kept small and high up. The main entrance to a castle complex had to be large enough to allow access to the enclosure, but since any opening created a vulnerable spot, both builders and garrisons took special care to reinforce the defenses of a castle's entryway. Castle gates would be made of heavy wood, often reinforced with metal plates and fastened with strong bolts. Backup came in the form of a portcullis, a heavy metal or wooden grill that could be lowered to block the entrance. In addition, the gateways usually had a small gatehouse, the better to see, trap, and counterattack any invading forces. Some castles had an enclosed space called a barbican in front of the gate. Would-be attackers wanting to reach the entrance had to risk entering this space where they might be ambushed. The same purpose was served by bent entrances, where the passageway through the gate included at least one 90-degree turn. Smart. Strong stone walls and cleverly laid traps were not enough to keep a castle wholly safe from attack. Through smart design, the building itself had to become a complex war machine. Instruments of defense were concentrated in the chemin de ronde, a protected elevated walkway high up behind the battlements. This walkway connected all parts of the castle, was sometimes covered, and was protected by a parapet, a low wall above the main wall, with openings through which one could see and shoot arrows or other weapons. From this shielded vantage point, defenders could send down a lethal rain of projectiles on their attackers. They would hurl rocks, boiling water or wine, and hot sand, which penetrated cracks in the assailant's armor. Incendiary projectiles such as fire pots filled with oil or tar could wreak havoc in the approaching enemy lines. The battlements, arrow slits, and loopholes provided protected openings from which to shoot arrows. As artillery developed in the 14th and 15th centuries, cannons were fired from here. 2. Murder holes, or menetrier, above doors and cut into the ceilings of gatehouses allowed the defenders to drop projectiles or burning liquid down onto any attacker who managed to get that close. Sorry, murder hole is a funny word. I don't know why. By exploiting the castle's potential as a killing machine, a small number of defenders were able to keep large contingents of enemies at bay. As a result, full-force assaults were infrequent, although they could occur when the attackers had sufficient resources, men, and siege engines. One such assault took place in 1147, when an expeditionary force of European crusaders on their way to the Second Crusade arrived at the gates of Lisbon, a city then in Muslim hands. There the crusaders deployed battering rams, mangonels, which was a siege weapon for catapulting projectiles, and mobile siege towers to launch an attack. They also used a technique called undermining, or digging tunnels under the walls, then setting fires in them to cause the walls, which had timber frames, to collapse. Within 4 months, the Crusaders had forced the surrender of the city. Given the cost and scarcity of manpower and resources, however, raiding parties were often unsuccessful. It was more common for medieval armies to blockade or encircle a castle with the aim of exhausting the defenders into submission via siege. This type of operation could be dragged out for many months, as happened in the siege of Algeciras in southern Spain. The military operation began in 1342 and lasted 21 months as Christian forces under Alfonso XI besieged the Muslim-held city. It was a complex operation involving numerous forces and innovative war machinery on both sides. The Muslim defenders were armed with rudimentary cannons the Spanish called truenos, which is Spanish for thunder, because they made a terrifying noise. To strengthen his attack, Alfonso called for the delivery of ingenios, a kind of catapult, to breach the walls of the city. Every night, those inside the city tried to patch up the damage wrought during the day. Such was the quantity of projectiles launched against the walls of Algeciras that almost a century and a half later, in 1487, during the conquest of Granada, Ferdinand the Catholic sent a contingent to the city to gather up all the stone balls they could find for reuse in the bombardment of Malaga. Life on the inside. The community living within the castle complex was sometimes quite large, although numbers varied greatly depending on the place and period. For example, the Templar Crusader castle of Safed in northern Israel, which was rebuilt around 1260, had a capacity for 2,200 soldiers in wartime and a permanent garrison in peacetime of 1,700 men. On the other hand, in the 15th century, many castles run by Spanish military orders saw their communities dwindle to just 1 or 2 knights and a few servants. Provided that they were far away from the border with Al-Andalus, the area of the Iberian Peninsula under Muslim rule, these castles had little to threaten them, and therefore little need for defenders. Even before this, in 1271, King James I of Aragon had authorized the warden of the strategic fortress of Biar in Alicante, on the border with Castile, to remain there with just 12 men, 1 woman, 1 mule, and 3 dogs. Whether the castle community was large or small, its members needed space to live, to store food, water, and livestock, and to carry out domestic and artisanal activities. The oldest fortresses, those located in volatile border areas, or those that had faced the vicissitudes of war, were generally not very comfortable environments given their military emphasis. Other castles, meanwhile, offered all kinds of comforts to their occupants, including latrines, cisterns, wells, hearths, kitchens, ovens, and of course chapels. As they served as centers for collecting feudal rents, generally paid in kind, some complexes had extensive storerooms for keeping these goods. It was not uncommon for castles to have their own bakeries, distilleries, and forges. Some major fortresses included large reception rooms where kings, nobles, and prelates could flaunt their status. While the furniture in these rooms tended to be austere, the decoration was elaborate. The walls and ceilings were often adorned with paintings or hung with tapestries which, as well as being decorative, provided insulation from damp and drafts. Decline and fall. For over 500 years, medieval castles provided defense and bragging rights for their inhabitants, but by the 16th century, the development of modern artillery had rendered many medieval castles obsolete. Cannonballs had the power to damage castle walls, making their design impractical and ineffective. Over time, the traditional castle design, with high walls surrounding a stone keep perched high on a motte, was slowly replaced by a new model of fortification built to withstand cannon fire. These new fortifications were cannon-proofed, with bastions and thick, angular walls that were sunk into the ground. As for the existing castles, some were converted into palaces, Lightly fortified residences with large windows knocked into the previously impenetrable walls, added facilities, and perhaps even gardens. The Alcazar de Segovia in Spain, for example, was built as a fort in the 12th century and later became a palace for the Castilian monarchs. Many old castles, however, were abandoned. In modern times, some have been converted into museums and monuments. Caen Castle, I think you say, is now home to the Normandy Museum, and Scarborough Castle, while in ruins, is a tourist attraction in North Yorkshire. Having withstood violent battles, technological advances, and the weight of several centuries, these crumbling but still majestic structures stand as silent witnesses to and symbols of an era in which they played a central role in the history of Europe. So looking at these pictures, this is in Winchester Castle, which is fun because I've actually been here. We didn't get to go inside that day, but I've been there. I have a photo of me outside of it. But this was King Arthur's castle. You can see the round table up here. And my name comes from Guinevere, so I was like, this is my castle. Obviously. All right. This is a cutaway of Scarborough Castle. What can we see? The rampart up here. The turrets. 2, 3. You can only see 3 of them here. This picture. The storeroom is down here. Number 4 is the reception hall. And a banquet hall up here. And the chapel. This shows the collapse of Dover Castle, which I've also been to, and I actually got to walk around there. It's actually got to, I guess, go inside Dover Castle, although there's not much left of it. But Dover Castle was really cool. Mostly the World War II stuff. Underneath it was cooler, but this is pretty neat. This is apparently a book about Greek mythology from the 15th century, but you can see the architecture in this drawing is not very Greek. It's very medieval castle looking. And this is Caen Castle in Normandy. So like I said, it's now a museum. Let's see, this is El Castillo de la Estrella, or the Castle of the Star. So number 1, there's the keep. It's the actual castle-y bit. The main fortress, where everything's protected. The wall around it, which you can see extending out around. Number 4, there's number 4, that's just where the people live. And the church is right here. You can see it looks like gravestones outside of it. It's appropriate for a little church. And then on the outside, that's just the regular settlement. Royal hiding place. So this, I believe, used to be a Muslim fort that got converted into a full-on castle. It's a neat little medieval painting down there, the castle wall. This is Galliard Castle, built by Richard the First, or what's left of it anyway. It's really haunting with those clouds. Showing off the Motte and Bailey, it says in this diagram. You can see the keep there, the actual castle. The inner courtyard here, you can see where they've dug around it so they can fill that with water, I assume. The fortified courtyard, it says over here. The wooden palisade, looks like they're building it right there. And defensive moat. Oh, here's the moat. So this is the motte. And this is the moat down here. Let's see. This castle is in Wales, it says. Does it say the name? Harlech Castle, I believe. It's really cool. Like, that's a castle. When I think like a medieval castle, I picture exactly something like this. This is an Ayyubid drawing of a citadel in Aleppo. They should do an article on Crac de Chevalier. That's a really neat place. William the Conqueror, little tower there. Of course, he built all kinds of castles. This is a sketch from the 13th century by castle architect. Another painting here. This is on the Bayeux Tapestry, actually, showing the castle there in Brittany. And look at this big guy right here. This is the Keep of Arques near Carcassonne in southern France. And then this beautiful cover art here. This is also in France. This is Castelnau, or the New Castle, along the Dordogne River. The sunlight beaming down. Really pretty. Alright, that is it for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this extra long video. I actually had a lot of fun recording it. I was low-key kind of dreading, like, oh, I'm going to lose my voice. I'm going to get so tired. But I really like these articles. I think they're interesting. And again, if you want to pick the articles that I read, because I didn't choose these articles, the channel members did, you can click the join button or the first link in the description box just down below here. I'd love to have you. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a good